Welcome to Historic Wings. I'm Thomas Van Hare, and this is a playthrough video of the new book-based solitaire air war game, MAG-23 Guadalcanal, that depicts the air battles of the Cactus Air Force during the Second World War. The Cactus Air Force was Marine Air Group 23, or MAG-23, and the game is in a narrative style with very consequential decision-making. What you decide, not the dice, determines the outcome. The sequence of play is shown on the daily operations chart, and a phase marker guides you through based on numbered boxes on the chart. However, the centerpiece of gameplay is your logbook, which tells the story of your unit's deployment on Guadalcanal. Let's dive straight in and show you how it's played. As we go through gameplay, I will share sample entries for the logbook. This game can be played with or without game counters. Or you could use miniatures if you like. Mission tables establish the circumstances, and you decide how you will use your pilots, planes, and available aviation fuel to address each. These tables change week by week as you play through the 7.5 weeks of your deployment, and each game day is a separate game experience of between 15 minutes and an hour. As this is our first game week, we'll use the mission tables for week 1. Some weeks are harder than others. In this first week, we're likely to encounter a lot of air raids and experience nearly nightly naval bombardment from offshore. Each game day begins with Phase 1. The first thing you do is roll for the weather on the Phase 1 weather chart with 1d6, or a single 6-sided die. I'm not going to show you my dice rolls, but I will read you the results. I'll show you the tables so you can see how it works. So let's roll. That's a 6 on the die. Clear weather, a +2 weather modifier, which applies to takeoffs and landings. On Guadalcanal, that's important because the runway was hastily built and very poorly made. Historically, in the first weeks before improvements could be made, the Marines lost more airplanes to runway accidents than to the Japanese. That's represented in this game, so good weather helps. And on yesterday's game day, the field suffered 3 hits from naval bombardment, which gives us a -3 on today's takeoffs and landings. The clear weather gives us a +2, so that balances out to -1. We should expect about half our planes will suffer runway accidents. We'll have to factor that into our planning on the number of planes we fly. The rest of Phase 1 is a decisive phase. There are choices to make about what we do. We start by scheduling our Combat Air Patrol, or CAP. We don't have to have a CAP, but having one helps early on because we're not likely to receive many early warning reports from the Coast Watchers. Our radar system isn't set up yet, and without early warning reports, only the CAP will engage a Japanese raid. Keeping planes flying will stave off a surprise attack, but it is costly in fuel. Each plane on the CAP burns 2 drums of fuel for the mission. The pilot roster helps you manage your pilots. Mine already shows the results from the first 3 days of operations. We've had some losses, 3 men killed and 1 with a serious wound. He won't be coming back to Guadalcanal. This is the pilot roster for VMF 223 with its Grumman F4F4 Wildcats. In addition, I have another roster for VMSB 232 with 12 SBD-3 Dauntless dive bombers and the U.S. Army Air Force's 67th Fighter Squadron with its 5 Bell P-400 Airacobras. For the CAP today, Lieutenant Campbell, the Squadron Executive Officer, or XO, will lead 2 elements of Grumman F4F Wildcats. The term element is key to gameplay. It represents a 2-plane formation with a lead plane and a wingman. When you schedule a CAP or assign aircraft later, you always do so in pairs. The plan is nobody flies without a wingman. On Lieutenant Campbell's wing, we'll put Lieutenant Fox. In the second element will be Lieutenant Harpin and Lieutenant Quaid as his wingman. All of this is then written into the logbook, which reads a lot like a historic document. Those 4 Wildcats on the CAP will use 8 drums of fuel. That's recorded on the deployment calendar, and as you can see, I'm already using up too much fuel, so I'm going to have to manage that better in the future. With that done, we start with Phase 2 by rolling the type of mission. It will either be an air, land, or sea mission, and well, I rolled a 2, so 2 + 2 is 4, which yes, it's an air mission. In Phase 3, we get our first reports from Coast Watchers and Marine Scouts. This is a passive phase, so we're rolling dice to set the circumstances. Decisive phases, however, drive the story and the action and matter more to the outcomes. So we roll on Phase 3, Coast Watcher and Marine Scouts report. As this is an air mission, we use the tables on the left side. There are 5 different Coast Watchers, and you roll dice for each separately. So let's see what we get as reports. Bougainville. I rolled a 3, so nothing is reported from that Coast Watcher. New Georgia. A 5, so we have a report from Donald Kennedy, the New Zealander, and Sergeant Harry Wickham. With that report from New Georgia, we have a +2 sighting mod. We'll go into what that means in a minute. Continuing on, Santa Isabel, I rolled a 1, so that's no report. Savo Island, the Norwegian named Leif Schroeder. So okay, I rolled a 2, so no report from him. Father de Klerk, the missionary priest on western Guadalcanal, I rolled a 2, so no report from him either. Next, we record that on the logbook. We have only 1 Coast Watcher report, and that doesn't give me a lot of confidence, but at least it's something. For now, we don't roll on the Phase 4 radar table, as the radar isn't set up yet during our first week on Guadalcanal. And then in Phase 5, we see what was reported by the Coast Watcher. We roll on the air table. We roll a 6, which is 6 A6M zeros. So they're performing a small fighter sweep. Do I have enough cap already launched to address that? I mean, maybe, but with the runway damage, about half of the planes scheduled are probably going to crash on takeoff. We decide all this in Phase 6, which is a decisive phase, so no dice are rolled. I'm going to assign 4 more Wildcats to this mission, so pulling up the pilot roster, and remember we always assign planes in pairs or elements, I'll put the commanding officer, or our CO, Major Tango, with Lieutenant Lewis on his wing. Also, Lieutenant Harrison, who's one of the flight leaders, will have Sergeant Bird on his wing. Both Harrison and Bird have previously shot down 1 airplane each, and as you can see, I put little dots in the columns to show the number of planes they've shot down so far. Tango has 3 kills so far, and another 2 that makes him an ace, which gives him additional attack dice. We record this all in the logbook. Also, we have to decide whether we're going to do a close-range or long-range interception, and we can't change that later. A close-range interception uses only 1 drum of fuel per plane, while a long-range one uses 2 drums, but it does give us more time to attack the Japanese. We'll choose a close-range interception and mark off 4 drums of aviation fuel on the deployment calendar. Flight operations begins in Phase 7, a passive phase where we roll dice for takeoff accidents, a pair of D6 for each plane individually. Don't forget the modifiers from the weather or yesterday's runway hits. So we had +2 for the weather, -3 for the runway hits, so that gives us a -1 modifier on all our takeoffs and landings. First we roll for the 4 planes in the cap, which took off earlier. We're hoping for better than a 7, and on a 2 or less, a Wildcat gets wrecked and probably the pilot will be injured. So first we start with Lieutenant Campbell. Double 6s on the rolls, that's good, so -1, that's an 11, which is a good takeoff. Lieutenant Fox on his wing, he has a 4, which becomes a 3. That's a crash. The aircraft's damaged, and let's see if he got injured. That's a D6. So he's lightly injured. For how long? He's lightly injured and out for 3 days. Moving on to the next plane, Lieutenant Harpin. I rolled a 10, so that becomes a 9, which is no crash or injury. Then Lieutenant Quaid. A 5 that becomes a 4, which is a crash. The aircraft is damaged, and a possible injury roll. No, he's not injured. After takeoff, you have to join the remaining planes together into complete elements as much as you can. It's okay to have a single plane element, but you can't have 2 elements with a single plane in each. In this case, Lieutenant Harpin will join on Lieutenant Campbell's wing. The damaged planes are always repaired and available for the next day. The Marine ground crews were that good. Now imagine a couple hours later, the aircraft we assigned have to take off as well. So Major Tango, he rolls an 8, so that's a 7. He barely got into the air. And Lieutenant Lewis is on his wing. And I rolled a 7, which becomes a 6, so he crashed. No damage to the plane, a possible injury. He rolls a 2, so there is no injury. Lieutenant Harrison comes next, one of our flight leaders. He's got an 8, which becomes a 7, so again, no crash or injury, and Sergeant Byrd on his wing. That's an 11, so there's no problem with him getting into the air either. We record the crashes on the pilot roster. Major Tango has no wingman, so let's reorganize what's in flight. Generally, you don't want the CO or executive officer or flight leaders to fly alone, so let's have Sergeant Byrd change and join on his wing. Now we have 2 Wildcats from the cap and 3 Wildcats from the assigned aircraft up to meet whatever the Japanese have coming at us, which is supposed to be 6 A6M Zeros. But we can't be sure of that until we see them. Phase 8 is when our pilots get to first sight the enemy. Is it really just those 6 zeros? With only +2 modifiers on sighting, I don't have a lot of confidence in that. We roll on the Phase 8 sighting table. 2d6. Yeah, 4. So we add 2 from the Coast Watcher modifiers, and that gives us 6, which means it's an inaccurate report. We have to re-roll the Japanese force on the Phase 5 table. So we roll a 2, so that's 9 D3A Val dive bombers and 9 A6M Zeros. And we've got 5 Wildcats against 18 enemy aircraft. Still, those Wildcats are pretty tough, and these are Marines, so don't ever forget that. They're going to do some damage. Most likely, we're going to take some losses, though. Phase 9 begins combat operations, and this is a decisive phase. We roll to determine combat outcomes, but everything else is based on our decisions. Those familiar with the combat system from Tally-Ho will recognize a lot of how this works. 1d6 of attack dice is rolled per element of American planes, and 1d6 per shotai of Japanese. Combat is resolved based on the Air Combat Operations chart. We use a row of task boxes that pertains to a close-range interception because that's what we chose back in Phase 6. We perform the 4 task boxes on that row only, starting from the left and going to the right. In the first task box, the cap and the assigned aircraft get to hit the Japanese bombers first, without the Japanese fighters yet able to engage. We're diving into attack, and hopefully we're going to hammer those Val dive bombers hard. We'll use the air background and game counters to help us visualize the dogfight. Similar to how it works in the Tally-Ho combat system, the Wildcats have an attack-defend value of 5-3, and the Vals have an attack-defend value of 6-1. That's what you need to roll on each attack die to get a successful attack or defend. You position your planes on the map to show where they're going to engage, and in this case, based on the task box, our Wildcats are engaging the Vals. The Zeros are off to the side, at least for now. On the American side, you don't have to engage with everything you have, but in this case, it makes sense to do that. But the entire Japanese formation of either bombers or fighters will always stay together and fight together. The pair of Wildcats, game counter number 1, is the CO, Major Tango, with Sergeant Byrd on his wing. That element gets 1d6 of attack dice. Every element gets 1d6, plus 2d6 because Tango is the commanding officer. So that's 3d6 for that element. Element number 2 is Lieutenant Campbell, the XO, with Lieutenant Harpin. That's 1d6 for the element, plus 2 for the XO. So 3d6 for that as well. Element 3 is a single plane, Lieutenant Harrison. Now remember, each element, or part thereof, gets 1 attack die, so he gets 1d6. He's also a flight leader, however, so he gets an additional d6, so he has 2d6 of attack dice. So we add that up, and together we have 8d6 of attack dice on the American side. As for the Vals, they have only 3 shotais and no aces, so they just get 3d6 of attack dice. We'll roll each side together, and then we attribute the resulting hits. These Val dive bombers don't have much defense, so they're going to suffer pretty badly, I think, from this attack. Let's roll the Wildcats first, and remember, their attack-defend values are 5-3. The result is 5-6, 5-5, 6, 3, and 1. The 5s and 6s are successful attacks, so that's 5 of those. And the 1s and 2s and 3s are successful defends, so they have 2 successful defends. That's actually really good. For the Vals, their attack-defend values were 6-1, and with only 3 dice. So that's a 1, 3, and 6. 1 successful defend and 1 successful attack. That's a pretty lucky roll too. So let's look at how that plays out. 5 successful attacks by the Wildcats, and the Vals rolled 1 successful defend, so they reduced the number from 5 to 4. That means 4 Vals were shot down right off the bat. As for the Vals, they had 1 successful attack with the 6 that they rolled, but the Wildcats had 2 successful defends, so that reduces the number of successful attacks by 2. So no Wildcats were shot down. Next, we attribute the kills to individual pilots, which is done randomly, first by element and then within each element, though the leader more often gets the kills. On page 4 of the book and rules under 1.6 Dyson Tables, it reads, "When assigning victories for enemy aircraft shot down, the lead plane will get credit more often. Roll a d6. On a 1 to 4, the lead plane is awarded credit, and on a 5 or 6, the wingman gets the credit." We have 4 kills to attribute. Use whatever dice you have so it works out essentially randomly, but don't worry about making it perfect. The first kill goes to the second element. A 2, that's the lead plane, Lieutenant Campbell. The second kill, and that's Lieutenant Campbell again. 2 kills in a single attack pass, which happened in history as well. The third kill goes to the first element, and that would be Major Tango. And the fourth, and also Major Tango. So he's also gotten 2 kills. We remove one of the game counters of Vals, which represents 3 of the 4 shot down. We'll take away number 1. Then we flip over one of the others, which shows the side with 2 Vals on it. They started with 9, and now there's only 5 left. Back on the kills we attributed, if you look on the pilot roster, Major Tango already had 3 kills, so now he has 5. That makes him an ace. So from now on, he gets an additional 1d6 of attack dice added to his dogfights. To keep track of the kills easily, I usually put little dots in the pilot roster, as you can see, and I put them both on the top and the bottom. We've done well and could break off and head for home before the Zeros can attack, but that would leave the 5 remaining Vals to bomb Henderson Field. Based on the Vals bombing results, which are a 4-2, that means that on a 4, 5, or 6 they would score a hit, and they would get 2 victory points per hit scored. Also, each bombing hit requires that I roll on table 1, hits resolution, so I could suffer more runway damage, fuel hits, or even planes destroyed from their bombing, so I'm not going to break off. In the second task box on the row, there's an RTB check. So if we shoot down more Vals in the next round of combat, they have to roll to see if they jettison their bombs and return home. However, in this task box, the Japanese Zeros are going to engage. And if Japanese fighters are attacking, you have to engage them with at least one of your elements. How I handle these Zeros is my decision. So let's have Lieutenant Campbell and his wingman take on the Zeros. But that's 2 planes against 9, so let's hope they can hold him off while the other 3 Wildcats we have shoot down more of the Vals. If we don't shoot down at least 1 more, though, they won't have an RTB check. The second task box of combat begins, so let's first see how the 2 Wildcats are holding off the 9 Zeros. That's a real sacrifice and some brave stuff. They'll do a thatch weave, which increases their chances of getting a successful defend roll. It makes the Wildcats' attack defend values go from 5-3 to 6-4, so hopefully they'll roll well and get at least 1 if not 2 successful defends. The 9 Zeros are in 3 show ties, so they're rolling 3d6. Lucky for us, none of them are aces, or they would have a lot more attack dice. A quadruple ace, for example, adds 4 attack dice. Lieutenant Campbell is an XO, so he gets 2 additional attack dice. That's 3 attack dice in all, 3d6. The 3 show ties of Zeros also get 3 attack dice. Having an XO, flight leader, or ace matters a lot, as it did in history. Use them sparingly, however, because the runways are bad and you don't want to lose your best pilots in accidents. So let's get to the fight. 3d6 for the Wildcats. That's a 4, 4, and a 6. So 1 successful attack with a 6. And because of the thatch weave, that's 2 successful defends. Pretty lucky rolling, actually. And for the Zeros, a 6, 6, and a 3. So Zeros have an attack defend value of 4, 0. They can't get a successful defend roll. If you hit 1, it goes up in flames. Of course, that's pretty much what happened in history because Zeros had no armor plating and no self-sealing fuel tanks. So let's interpret those results. The Zeros scored 2 successful attacks, but the Wildcats scored 2 successful defends because of the Thatch Weave. So no Wildcats were shot down. Pretty lucky. If they hadn't done the Thatch Weave, we would have lost both, however. You can imagine that they're probably both shot up a bit, but the Wildcat can take a lot of damage and still fly home. The Zeros have no successful defense, they never do, and so that 1-6 that they rolled counts. 1 0 goes down. So let's attribute the kill. So Lieutenant Campbell gets the kill, so we record that in the pilot roster, his 3rd kill this mission, and we'll write that into the logbook as well. And let's work out the results from the second part of the fight. 3 Wildcats in 2 elements going after 5 remaining Vals, also in 2 elements. Tango's a commanding officer and an ace, so he gets 3d6 of attack dice. Each of the 2 elements get 1d6 of attack dice, and Lieutenant Harrison is a flight leader, so he gets an additional 1d6. I should have used the status indicators before to help me remember what is what, so let's put them on the board now. Let's double check that. The Wildcats here get 6d6, 2 elements plus 1 as an ace, 2 for the CO, and 1 additional for the flight leader. So that's 6d6. The Vals are just 2 show ties, so they get only 2d6 now. This is going to be rough on the Vals, as it would have been historically. 3 6s came up, and a 1, 2, and a 3. So that's 3 successful attacks and 3 successful defends. That's a heck of a roll. As for the Vals, 1 and a 2, so that's 1 successful defend and no successful attacks. So they've lost 2 more planes. So we can remove the number 3 counter. The Japanese side doesn't attribute losses to the various show ties individually, except if there's a Japanese ace present. So who gets the kills? Okay. And Tango got 1 and Harrison got the other. This task box has an RTB check in it, so the Japanese Vals are going to have to make a roll to see if they stay. In 9.6 RTB checks, it reads, when a Japanese bomber formation loses at least 1 aircraft from combat in any task box that includes the notation RTB, the entire formation must roll an RTB check. Roll 1d6 and add 1 for each aircraft lost in the task box. That doesn't mean that you add up all the kills from the previous task boxes. The Japanese pilots were pretty brave and they forged on even after they took a lot of losses. The Vals roll 1d6 and they add 2 because that's the number of planes we shot down. A 6, so add 2, that's an 8. The Japanese have had enough. We've shot down 6 Vals and 1 0 for the loss of none of our own. So I'm going to take this opportunity to break off now too. The Vals are heading home. The Zeros would only stay if I did, but why press my luck? So this brings combat to an end. We would continue now with the next 2 task boxes if there were any aircraft still participating, but there are none. So we go back to the daily operations chart. At the end of Phase 9, you'll see there's a sub-phase called Press Attack or RTB, but since we broke off, we can no longer press the attack. We move on to Phase 10. We land back on Henderson Field. With 3 runway hits and the weather, we're still -1 on these rolls. Let's go through them using the pilot roster from left to right. Major Tango is a 6, which becomes a 5, which is a crash. The plane's not damaged. He ground looped it. At least he's not injured. Lieutenant Campbell is a 5. That's another crash, aircraft damaged. And he's lightly injured, so that's a 1d6 for every light injury to determine how many days they're unavailable to fly. So that's 2 days out now. And another 6 for Lieutenant Harrison. He crashed as well. Aircraft is damaged and no injury. Lieutenant Harpin, I roll a 10, so that becomes a 9, a good landing. And Sergeant Bird got an 8, which becomes a 7, which is also a good landing. So 2 more damaged planes, but those will be repaired overnight, and one of my pilots is down for 2 days. So we move on to Phase 11, which is the end of mission assessment. This is a passive phase. We double-check our entries in the pilot roster and deployment chart to make sure we logged everything correctly. Then we roll on the Phase 11 additional mission table. A 4, so there's no additional mission to fly today. We continue to Stage 3 post-flight. And from phases 12 to 17, I'll put the tables up on the screen and walk you through the roles. Disease and infections, always a problem on Guadalcanal, though in the first week it wasn't too common to see any effects. A 5, so there's no infections. Pistol Pete, at the end of the day, usually around dinner time, the Japanese ground forces would send artillery fire toward Henderson Field. They rarely hit anything. A 6, so that's also no firing and no hits. Washing Machine Charlie, that's a single Japanese plane that would come after midnight and orbit overhead for a few hours, dropping a bomb every now and then to make sure no one could get any sleep. Nothing also. Night infiltration, again very rare at this early stage of the battle, but you never know. And we have no infiltration attempt. Next is Louis the Louse in naval bombardment. This was pretty heavy during the first week, so we're likely to see some. Okay, a 5. That's poor flares with 2 destroyers firing and 1 hit scored. For the hit, we have to consult Table 1 to see what the damage is. A 3, so we've lost an airplane, and we rolled randomly which type. I've lost a P-400 and I record that on my deployment calendar. Finally, we have Phase 17, Random Events and End of Day. The first step is the SAR, or Search and Rescue. But based on the pilot roster, we have no pilots who are currently missing in action, or MIA, so there's no need to launch a SAR. If we did launch a SAR, we could launch either 1 or 2 airplanes, but each plane burns 2 drums of fuel. Anyway, the next thing to do is to check the random events table. On a D6, a 1 or 2 means we have a random event. And we roll a 2, so yes, we have a random event. We roll 2d6 to see which one it is. A 6, which is runway improvements. Add +2 to all takeoffs and landing accident dice rolls for the next 5 game days. That's a very welcome roll, particularly during these first 2 weeks. To wrap up a game day, you double check to make sure that everything is logged correctly, make a final logbook entry, and work out whether you had a win, a loss, or a draw for the day. We shot down 6 planes. Each VAL is worth 2 victory points, and a 0 is worth 1 victory point. So we scored 11 victory points. The Japanese got none. So we won the game day. That's our 4th win in 4 days. We could lose the next 3 days and still win the game week. If you win the game week, you move the perimeter status marker up the perimeter status track by 1 step toward American victory. The game starts at Japan advancing, and it's good to move it up a bit if you can early on. If it goes down to Japanese victory, the game ends, the Japanese break through, overrun the perimeter, occupy the airfield, and take everyone prisoner. We're off to a good start, but I should be careful with the fuel. You've got to manage your resources carefully in this game, just like they did on Guadalcanal back in 1942. This wraps up our playthrough. Thanks for watching. This is Thomas Van Hare and Historic Wings signing off. And remember, the future is in your dice.